everybody. Today on the bench we once again have our 3S Sentin. What I'm going to be showing you how to repair today is the differential ring and pinions. Now it's not very common that the internal gears go out in here, but I will tell you what the part number is for those as well, and I'll show you how to replace them. But what we're focusing on today is this case and the pinion that drives it. As you can see, mine has been pretty well chewed up. I'm going to be replacing it with the metal part offering from Arrma. But I will also let you know what the part number is for the stock replacement part. First things first though, we got to get the other diff out. And you can see I've already got the rear diff out. First, we'll show you how to get that one out. All part numbers and links to the parts will be listed in the description of this video. Alright, so first thing we're going to do with a 2mm driver is stick it in through these front holes of the bumper here. And these screws that we're taking out here just hold in the front bumper spring, which basically absorbs shock under impacts to the front bumper. There will be two of them here. That's number one. And we'll get number two here. By the way, if you don't have an RC car stand, it will help immensely with this project. Basically just holding the car up and allowing you to spin it freely to whichever angle is best for you to be able to get at the car. Alright, with the second screw out, I'm taking this whole piece out because my front bumper is broken. If yours isn't though, you won't necessarily have to take this piece out. It may just sit there with the bumper, but you can see that takes these two screws out here, which allows us to get the upper half of the diff case off easier. So we're going to do the same thing with the top shock screws here, and then also for the camber links in just a moment. They all use 2mm drivers. Here's one shock screw. Almost. When you set your screws aside, having a magnetic parts tray will help not lose track of the screws, and labeling them in little baggies may also help if this takes you quite a while not to forget where the screws go when it's time to put them back in. Okay, with the shocks loosened, we can now do the camber links after moving the shocks out of the way. And you can see the camber links once again are held in by a 2mm screw just off the front here. And the same process that we're doing here really applies to the back. Remove the top shock screws, the camber link screws, the bumper screws, just the two. And then the next step we'll show you is also the same in the back. There's going to be some larger screws off the bottom here. Once I get this last camber link screw out, there we go. Now we can carefully pull those out as well, and drop them off to the sides. Your wheels are going to kind of rest off to the side like this. This isn't detrimental to them at all. So the next thing I'm going to do, because I have the CVD axle upgrade kit, I'm going to remove the grub screws that actually hold them onto the diff outputs. And again, this is only if you have the CVD axles, which are an upgrade over stock. If you don't have them, there will actually be a hole down the center of the axle shaft. You'll stick your tool. It's also a 2mm. In order to remove those, the screws that hold the axles on. It's a bit of a different setup. Just gotta find this one. There we go. Now ideally you want to clean everything before you start as well, but there are some areas that are hard to get to. I would definitely clean this up before you remove everything. In fact, that's what I'm going to do. Alright, and with that wiped down, we'll continue on to the next step. And the only reason you really want to make sure you get at least the loose dirt off is if you get dirt inside the diff case, it can actually prematurely wear out the gears that are in there. Then you have to do this again, and, well, it's not exactly the most fun job. I enjoy it, but not everybody will. Alright, so the next step is going to be removing these 4 screws. This one here, there's one deep in here, and here, and then the 4th one is up there. Now this one, there won't be one in there in the rear, it'll be just these 3, but otherwise the same process applies to removing the rear diff case. These are pretty long screws, so I'm going to unthread these off camera. Feel free to pause the video if you're following along at home and get them undone yourself, and we'll move on to the next step after the next cut. Alrighty, and with those 4 extra long screws removed, good wrist workout in, we're ready to move on. Make sure you set those aside so you don't lose them. Up top here, once again, we're ready for the next step, and should be as easy as lifting up on the shock tower and a top diff case assembly just like that. And front and rear, the body posts are going to come with it. There we go. And of course, like I said, if you're using the standard axles, you'll have to remove a screw down the center of the axle tube here. But since I removed my grub screws already, I can just pull my CVDs off like that. There we are. And that is the diff that we're going to be working on. Now you can see this one here is a little worn, nowhere near as bad as the rear, but we're going to rebuild them both since we're in there. Make sure that this thing is going to be working good for plenty of time. Alright, now with the diffs side by side, you can see a bit more what I was talking about. On the right there is the front diff, far less chewed up than on the left, the rear diff. And when they go out, you just replace the ring and pinion because they're both going to be worn. In my case, I'm upgrading to the metal ring and pinion. Parts, numbers, and links will be in the description, but we'll go over them in here in just a second. Now, the reason you might want to do this is because the standards are made of a plastic composite, and as you can see, with 3S or 4S power in my case, they can get blown up pretty quick. So the parts you're going to want for the metal diff conversion are as follows. 310886. This is the metal input gear, which you can't see it right now, but we'll get to it when we start rebuilding them. You will need a different diff case for the actual internal gears. The internal gears you can reuse, and the part number on this is 310772. Camera won't show them for some reason. These are gaskets, basically just to seal the diff case, keep your diff fluid in there. Part number 310796. If you're doing both diffs, you will only need one of these because it is a 2-piece gasket set for both diffs. And the last part you need for the metal conversion is 310885, and this is the metal ring gear. Alright, without any further ado, we're going to start by disassembling these and getting to the internal gears and the output shafts, which you will need to reuse even if you're doing the metal conversion. Alright, so we're going to start by disassembling this here. The first step is going to be to take off this black plastic yoke that holds the input gear in alignment with the ring gear here. And there's going to be 2 screws you'll need to take out. This one here, and then 180 degrees on the other side. There's going to be another one. They go opposite directions just to make sure things stay strong. And these screws are somewhat long as well. These are 2mm screws. I believe I neglected to mention that. There we are. Now with a bit of force we can pry apart the diff case halves. And this is going to be a bit messy because there's going to be lubricant all over it, as well as, there we go, as well as, in my case, bits of shredded diff material. There we go, we've got the two yoke halves apart there, and I dropped the pinion into oblivion. But, oh, no, there it is. So, you may want to replace these bearings. In my case, they're actually still very smooth, so I'll just hit them with a little bit of bearing lubricant, make sure they keep going strong. Same with these output bearings here, you'll want to reuse those. Next step in disassembling this diff is going to be 4 screws here that will allow you to separate the diff case and get to the internal gears. One screw. And if you're converting to the metal diffs, you will not need to reuse these screws. The new cases come with new screws. However, I believe that if you're just going with the standard single-piece composite differential ring gear, you will need to keep these screws because the new case does not come with new screws. And the part number for this plastic case is ARAC 4022. Part number for the stock plastic input gear is ARA 311031, if you would like to just reuse the stock parts, or if you like the upgrade. Again, the parts will all be listed in the description. This would go a lot faster if you had a drill and some bits that would chuck up into a drill. But there we have it. Now we can pry this apart and see the internal gears there. Now you will want to clean these gears off really good because there will be a little bit of metal in the fluid in there, so you want to get that all off. But essentially what we need to reuse is this gear here, the pins. There will be 4 of them, and 4 of those gears, as well as 2 of these output shaft pieces here, just like that. So I'm going to get all of these removed from my diff, cleaned up, and then we'll meet you at the next step, which is rebuilding a new diff. Alright, we've got all of our parts to assemble a new diff laid out here. Got that ring gear, case, new gasket, the yoke, the bearings for the input gear, bearings that go on the outside of the case, screws for the case, the internal gears, the outputs, and the pins that hold those internal gears in place. One other thing I forgot to mention is these O-rings here. I actually don't have a part number for those offhand, but there'll be a link for them in the description as well. You may be able to reuse these. I'm going to because they look perfectly fine, but if they're damaged in any way, you'll definitely want to replace them. And take notice of any shims like this one that you might find. They're very thin pieces of metal in a ring shape there, and where they were placed. So we're going to get started assembling everything here. We're going to start by putting these pins into the diff case here. So what I do for rebuilding these is put 2 pins in each side. You'll see there's these long standoffs and then kind of these indents as well. I put the pins in the long standoffs here. And the next thing, of course, will be to install those O-rings. While you were cleaning all the gears, that would be a good time to Inspect them for damage. If you see any missing teeth or damaged teeth that aren't straight or incredibly worn down teeth, you'll need to replace the internal gears too. Mine look good, so I'm reusing mine. With those O-rings pressed in place, we can drop the input gears through here. And you will want to make sure you do that part first. Once you get the other gears, the orbital gears here in place, it's going to be really hard to get them aligned. So now we'll drop these in. Once again, 2 on each side. Just like that. Alright, so we can drop the diff gasket on here. Make sure you don't tear this in any way when you're getting it on there. And you'll see there's a couple little notches here that will help you align the gasket with the 4 holes as well. And then the next thing we need is some diff fluid. I've gone with 30K here from Factory Team. It's team associated. And for this, you don't need to use all that much. Basically, we'll just make sure we get a good coating over all the gears. Case doesn't need to be completely full of this stuff for it to lubricate those internal gears. And our next step is going to be carefully aligning the 2 halves here. You may need to wiggle the inputs back and forth. Get all those gears lined up just like that. Alright, now we're ready to drop on the crown gear. But first we'll give this a little spin, make sure all those gears are working around in there. Sounds and feels good. Alright. There we go. And this is only going to go on one way. It's keyed. And then with the screws that come with the new diff case, let's get each of them started here. And these are a 2mm driver as well. These plastic cases don't come pre-threaded, so you will have to apply a bit of pressure to get the screws started, and that doesn't apply only to the metal versions. That'll be the same case for a new case on the plastic versions as well. It will take quite a bit of force as you are cutting threads in there. What I like to do is get it threaded most of the way in, and then basically get all the screws started before I start tightening it down, just so I can, when I am tightening them down all the way, I can make sure that the force is being applied evenly and it doesn't warp anything in the process. Once I have 2 screws opposed from each other, I'll actually bring them down snug. repeat the process with the other 2 screws. And once you've got all 4 screws installed in these bad boys, you can go ahead and press on your bearings. Oh, and actually this was the side that had the shim, so we're going to go ahead and add that back on this one. Press the bearings on to both sides. Which in some cases may take a little bit of persuasion. And then you'll see on the yoke halves here, one has a little pin, this one, and one does not. The side that does not have the pin is the side which is going to have the ring gear, just like that. And now we will slide our bearings onto the input here, and they will need to be spaced just a little bit, but you can also get that aligned by dropping it onto the yoke housing there. And then before you put the other side on, hold those bearings down and give it a good spin. Make sure everything feels good. And there will be just the slightest amount of play between the metal input and ring gears here. And that's what you want. Basically just allows for a bit of movement so that things don't get sheared off. And then we can put the other side of the yoke on there. And, of course, add our screws back. One going either direction here, so we've got this one here. And one on the other side. Doing the same process as we did with the case, where not tightening them down all the way until I have both screws in. There we go, and I'm going to go back and finish this one. And there we go. Now, if you have 2 diffs that are in need of replacements, you may have to repeat this process again, just like I am going to do. However, if one of your diffs looks decent and you're on a budget, you might be able to reuse one of them, so you may not have to rebuild both like I am. So, with that done, we'll get to installing these guys back on the truck, and then we're ready to go. Alright, with both of our diffs rebuilt, we're ready to go ahead and toss these guys in. Before you do that though, you want to make sure that both the top half and bottom half of the diff case have been cleaned out of any shavings or anything else in there that might become a problem for your diffs. And before just dropping this guy in, take note that there is a little divot on one side, and that's where the ring gear is going to sit. Just like that. And we can throw our top back on here. Just like that. And then reattach our camber links, our shocks, put those 3 screws back in the bottom, reattach the 2 bumper screws here, and we're ready to rip it once again. Hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and share the video. Until next time, have a good one.